The WTA just dropped a nuclear bomb on women's tennis, and mandatory genetic sex testing is now a reality for every single player on the tour. The US Open is about to become the site of the biggest human rights disaster the sport has ever seen, and world number one Aryna Sabalenka is standing tall defending these tests as essential for fairness. Human rights groups are screaming that this policy is unethical, unscientific, and straight-up traumatizing for the women being forced to submit, and the receipts are about to go public as the WTA's house of cards crumbles fast. The tennis establishment and mainstream media have been hiding the truth from fans for weeks, but not anymore, because you are now joining the truth seekers who refuse to look away while the WTA turns professional tennis into a surveillance state. Hit that subscribe button and join the Inner Circle membership to fund our independent investigation into the tour's backstage secrets, and smash that hype button while dropping a super thanks, because the corporate tennis machine does not want you to know what is really happening behind closed doors. The truth is finally exposed, and it is more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. It all started in July when the Women's Tennis Association quietly announced that every single player would be forced to undergo a one-time genetic test for the SRY gene, which is located on the Y chromosome and plays a critical role in male sex development. The test can be administered through a cheek swab, blood sample, or saliva sample, and here is the part that should make your blood boil. If a player tests positive for the SRY gene, they are barred from competing while further medical assessments are conducted, which means this is a de facto outright ban on transgender women in professional tennis. But what happened off camera changed everything. The testing officially began at the Cincinnati Open, which was the final warm-up tournament before the US Open, and world number 3 Jessica Pegula confirmed it to Front Office Sports while casually dropping the bomb that the genetic dragnet was already underway. Pegula called it very easy and very simple with no complaints, and she said the tour has been discussing this with players for over a year while sending educational information and gathering feedback. But here is where it gets ugly, because Human Rights Watch director Minky Wardens fired back hard, declaring that sex tests in all their forms have been debunked as unethical, unscientific, and unworkable. She accused the WTA of relying on racist gender stereotypes and reducing the sport to surveillance and stigmatization, and the WTA thought they were protecting fairness, but they only exposed their own incompetence. The rulebook confirms exactly what is happening, because the WTA's updated women's eligibility policy, which took effect July 21st, requires all players to undergo this one-time SRY gene screening. Players who test negative are permitted to compete and will not be tested again unless something seems off. But players who test positive face a nightmare scenario because they are barred from competition while the WTA conducts further medical evaluations. Players must sign an eligibility acknowledgement form and agree to cooperate with testing and any subsequent medical assessment. And if they refuse to comply, they are ineligible to compete while facing disciplinary measures including suspension, disqualification, exclusion from tournaments, or a fine. The WTA says medical information will be kept strictly confidential, but the receipts were about to go public and the truth is finally exposed. Here is the part that will make your head spin, because there are no known transgender women currently playing on the WTA tour, and that means the WTA is subjecting every single woman on the tour to invasive genetic testing to ban a group of athletes that does not even exist in professional tennis. The previous policy, which was updated in 2024, allowed transgender women to compete if they maintain testosterone levels below 2.5 nanomoles per liter for 2 continuous years. But the WTA decided that was not enough. They needed cheek swabs, they needed blood samples, and they needed to prove with science that even the scientist who discovered the SRY gene calls misguided and overly simplistic that every woman on tour is a real woman. The documents prove this is a solution in search of a problem, and the WTA is too arrogant to admit it. The psychological toll on these players is staggering, and the Sport and Rights Alliance Executive Director Andrea Florence tore into the policy by declaring that good intentions will never erase the stigmatization and trauma that women and girls will suffer due to sex testing. Lily Dong Lee Rosengard, who is an advocacy senior specialist at ILGA World, slammed the WTA for cobbling together a policy that does not advance the rights of women and girls, but instead undermines the safety and dignity of everyone on the tour. Trans and intersex athletes already face so many barriers and challenges both inside and outside of sport. And now, despite the fact that no-out trans women are currently competing at the professional level, all women and girl tennis players will have to prove their gender just so the WTA can ensure they never play at all. The WTA can claim they do not intend to cause harm, but the truth is finally exposed, and it is devastating. The players are divided, and the cracks are showing. But Aryna Sabalenka, who is the world #1 and the hero of this story, has publicly backed the policy by arguing that biological differences make separate categories important for competitive fairness. Speaking at the National Bank Open in Toronto, Sabalenka dropped the hammer when she said she thinks it is really important to keep the fairness in the tour, and she pointed out that biologically men are way stronger than women, so it would not be fair for a woman to compete against a biological man. Sabalenka said she is happy to take the test herself and called it pretty fair, and she is fighting for what she believes in while standing up to the critics and defending the integrity of women's sports. The villain in this story is the WTA establishment that is using her support to justify a policy which human rights groups are calling discriminatory and harmful. Jessica Pegula, who is the world #3 and a member of the WTA Players Council, confirmed that testing has started and said she has not heard any negative feedback, while adding that she thinks it is a hot topic right now, but the tour is doing a pretty good job and players seem to be okay with everything. But Coco Gauff, who is one of the top-ranked American women, is singing a very different tune because she said she understands the reasoning behind protecting fairness in women's sports, but is deeply concerned that the policy is creating animosity toward the transgender community. Gauff said she does not like the attack that it is creating, and she pointed out that people who do not really care but just want to use this as a reason to attack the trans community are the problem, while making it clear she supports the trans community and also supports fairness in sport. The WTA establishment is trying to paint this as a simple fairness issue, but the truth is finally exposed, and it is a lot more complicated than they want you to believe. The International Olympic Committee adopted a similar policy earlier this spring by requiring biological female athletes to have their sex determined through a one-time test to compete in women's events at the Olympics, and World Athletics along with World Boxing have also jumped on the SRY gene testing bandwagon. But here's what the WTA does not want you to know, because Andrew Sinclair, who is the geneticist that actually discovered the SRY gene, wrote last year that using the test to define a woman in sports is misguided and overly simplistic. The scientist who found this gene is telling the world that the WTA is using his discovery wrong, and the rulebook confirms that rare genetic variations mean chromosome patterns, and the presence of the gene and physical sex development do not always correspond in a straightforward way. The WTA does not care about science because they care about control and power and making a political statement at the expense of the women on their tour. The WTA claims the policy is designed to promote equal athletic opportunities and maintain fair competition, while saying it has been reviewed periodically in light of developments across international sport, and they consulted with WTA members and evolved standards across women's sport. The WTA recognizes this is a sensitive and complex issue and is committed to treating all players with dignity, but the receipts tell a very different story because human rights groups are demanding the WTA drop the testing immediately. 34 academics published an editorial warning that the rules violate human rights and risk psychological harm, while reinstating discredited sex verification practices abandoned decades ago, and the WTA can dress this up in fancy language all they want. The truth is finally exposed because this is a discriminatory policy that targets women with differences of sex development and lacks scientific backing. The broader war is just beginning because the US Open is about to become ground zero for protests and potential player boycotts, and the unresolved question is whether the WTA will back down under pressure from human rights organizations or double down and force every player to submit to this genetic dragnet in New York. Sabalenka is standing firm and defending the tests as essential for fairness, but the villain, which is the WTA establishment, is watching their reputation crumble in real time. Human Rights Watch and the Sports and Rights Alliance have condemned the tests as unethical, unscientific, and unworkable while demanding they be stopped immediately, and the WTA thought they could quietly roll this out at Cincinnati and slip it past the public. They were wrong because the media is finally waking up and the players are speaking out and the world is watching. every player on the WTA Tour is now forced to prove their womanhood through a cheek swab or a blood draw, and they have to sign forms acknowledging they could face suspension or fines if they refuse while submitting to a test that even the scientist who discovered the gene says is misguided. For what, exactly? To ban transgender women who are not even playing on the tour, and the WTA is subjecting hundreds of women to invasive, traumatizing genetic testing to solve a problem that does not exist. The documents prove this was never about fairness because this was about control and making a political statement and proving the WTA can force players to do whatever they want whenever they want, no matter the human cost. The industry is starting to distance itself from this disaster because Coco Gauff is publicly calling out the animosity the policy is creating, while the Sport and Rights Alliance is demanding the WTA reconsider, and Human Rights Watch is blasting the tests as unethical and unscientific. The WTA thought they had this locked down and thought the players would just go along with it and thought the human rights groups would stay quiet. But the truth is finally exposed, and the WTA's reputation is in a free fall of their own making. Sabalenka is standing tall as a hero, defending fair competition and refusing to back down. But the villain, which is the WTA establishment, is watching their carefully constructed narrative collapse around them. The WTA thought they would destroy the integrity of women's sports by allowing transgender women to compete. So they dropped a nuclear bomb on the tour with mandatory genetic sex testing, while thinking they would be hailed as heroes protecting fairness. They thought the human rights groups would back off and thought the players would just accept it and move on. But the truth is finally exposed, and the WTA is facing the biggest crisis in their history. The tests are unethical and unscientific and traumatizing the very women the WTA claims to protect. And the world is watching as the US Open becomes the site of the biggest human rights scandal tennis has ever seen. The WTA thought they could force every woman on tour to prove she is a real woman through a cheek swab and a blood test, while hiding behind words like fairness and dignity, while subjecting players to invasive genetic screening. They thought they could silence the critics and bury the controversy before the US Open. But the receipts were about to go public because the documents prove the WTA is implementing a discriminatory policy that lacks scientific backing and inflicts trauma on the women being tested. The rulebook confirms that positive tests lead to immediate bars from competition and further invasive medical assessments. And the truth is finally exposed for the entire world to see. Aryna Sabalenka is fighting for what she believes in by defending the tests as essential for fairness on the tour, while standing up to the critics and refusing to back down. But the villain, which is the WTA establishment that enforced this stigmatizing surveillance regime, is watching their empire crumble. Human Rights Watch is demanding the tests be stopped immediately, and the Sports and Rights Alliance is calling the policy discriminatory and harmful, while Coco Gauff is warning that the policy is creating animosity toward the transgender community. The WTA thought they would destroy the debate, but they only destroy themselves because their reputation is in tatters and their credibility is gone, and the US Open is about to become the site of protests and boycotts and the biggest human rights disaster in tennis history. The WTA thought they could control the narrative and control the players and control the truth, but the truth is finally exposed, and the WTA will never be the same.